Okay.
Hello.
Hey, everyone. How's it going, Colin?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Hey, everyone. I'm Kathy with Phase One Design.
And I'm calling with Bliss Home Designs.
Great seeing everybody today.
Yeah.
Today, we are super
Exciting
excited.
topic.
Yeah, definitely. We are going to be talking about design as a strategy to maximize profit on spec builds. And Colin with Bliss Home Designs is an expert in the spec world. I'm here because, obviously I have my history on the custom side, and I think we're going to have some great dialogue just with regards to custom versus spec.
Yeah.
So
And you know what? That's one of the things we can touch on is that, like, I think the custom side of things is what everyone wants to see, something that's unique. But it's a different approach when you're doing specs. So we'll probably get into that a little more.
awesome. Yeah. And just want to encourage everybody who's watching, if you have any questions during this, feel free to drop them in the chat during the show. If you're shy and don't want to ask questions, feel free just to PM us directly afterwards. And we always love to hear questions. So yeah, I guess let's just dive right in. So, a lot of people, I think when they think of a spec home, there's lots of different words that come to mind. It's like, okay, obviously we want to optimize ROI, and it's a very different type of project than a custom home. However, that being said, I think there's huge opportunity when you are doing a spec from an investor standpoint. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And how do you, very specifically, how do you leverage design as a strategy to maximize profit? Colin and I have lots of conversations about this because, again,
Yeah.
custom versus a spec world, I don't think one's better than the other, or one's it's just a different philosophy. And I think the two can collide in a very great way.
Well, and to underline that point, Kathy, design absolutely impacts profitability on a spec home,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
And so every design choice that is made, whether it's things that are going to affect permitting processes or time to market, resale value, whatever it is, all those design decisions are starting to lead to changes in your overall margin on the project, right? So
for
they're
sure.
obviously important things to consider.
Absolutely. And I think, Colin, I mean, maybe we won't deep dive into the actual design features right now. We will later on in this episode. Maybe let's start off with just talking about the balance between custom design and spec design. And what I mean by that is, obviously in a custom design, the world is your oyster. You can do anything you want. Normally the budgets are fairly high. This is someone's forever dream home. So we have that flexibility to do that as a design team. And when it comes to a spec design, I mean, you work with tons of clients that, they love design as well. They want it to be creative. But then on the flip side, it's like, okay, well, obviously there needs to be an ROI to maximize profit. And there's all these other different factors that need to make sense for the spec world. So how do you balance between the custom design and the spec design world?
Yeah, well, I have a couple points still on that topic here, Kathy. And like the first one really is like, I just kind of emphasize like investors that are balancing cost savings with that buyer appeal. Because you want to ensure obviously that you have a quick sale, which means that it's an attractive building, right? So obviously I think those things are important when you're trying to sell it because those timelines, if you have to hold it or have price reductions, once you list it, that can obviously cut into the bottom line numbers, right? So the other one I had in here is, like the curb appeal specifically, and it's, it kind of ties in with that same thing is an attractive, quick to sell house. Doing things that are design marketability, is things that people like now. How are our lifestyles different than they were, 20 years ago? You think of the homes built in the 80s, and a lot of the homes are partitioned up with small rooms where now we live more openly, right? And in our common spaces anyway. So, and I think even just the style is making sure, you can do things that are timeless and whatnot without, doing anything that's too crazy. So anyway,
Yeah,
those are
absolutely.
the initial highlights for sure.
Yeah, I also think from like an investment standpoint, I mean, the way I see it is, well, first of all, good design doesn't have to be more expensive. So, as an
Right.
example, let's say a 1,200 square foot space that's 3 bedrooms, let's say 2.5 bathrooms, so it takes off all those boxes, okay? And then you're given, let's just say, like the footprint of that to work with as a designer. So to design a floor plan that is awesome versus design a floor plan that isn't awesome, that isn't going to necessarily cost you more money, A, to design, or B, to build, right? Because you're still operating within the same footprint, the same square footage, and then also with the same floor count. But what would cost you money is, let's just say, for example, if you actually put that unit on the market, regardless of whether you're renting it or regardless of whether you're selling it, and it doesn't rent, like there's a cost associated with something sitting on the market, you know? I mean, some of these buildings we see, I mean, we're pretty close to a lot of these projects, and, you know, your carrying costs per month can be anywhere from like $4,000 a month to $10,000 a month, depending on how your financing is. And I understand that's like a whole complex, but I mean, at the same time, the point is, there's a cost associated with bad design that I think people don't really see.
Exactly, and that doesn't even affect the construction cost. It's just the timeline of the build, right? So that's the, you know, the construction costs are the next step we're going to probably chat about shortly. So.
Absolutely, yeah. I will also say too, you know, part of the challenge of doing an investment style project is your timing, right? It's always about timing. So let's just say day one, you know, you're like, hey, I have my piece of land. I'm going to go get a set of prints done. I am going to go get a permit, and then I'm going to build it, and then I'm going to sell it. So like end to end, you're, you know, let's say 18 months. So, and that's why, you know, the term speculative building, because you're speculating what's going to happen in the market in 18 months, which you're literally trying to predict the future, which is nobody can do, obviously. So in my personal opinion, if you have great design, you know, maybe you start the project when the market's like smoking hot, but you don't know what's going to happen with the market in 18 months. And if the market goes down and it becomes like a buyer's market or a renter's market, then you, as the investor that's trying to sell your property or rent your property, that's going to be a lot more challenging because, you know, yeah, it's the renters and buyers have just a lot more choice, and the quality of the design goes a long way.
Yeah, well, the other thing too is that, you know, if you're doing something that doesn't stand out and it's somewhat of a commodity when you're selling in the spec market, then now you're sort of treated like a commodity too, right? You know, I've seen guys trying to sell a home that is the same as the home down the street, and even though they upgraded the windows and upgraded the mechanical and all these kind of stuff, the buyer were looking at price per square foot, and now it just became a commodity, right? So I think that's why those design uniquenesses too can help, you know, that time on market when you're comparing to other comparables out there, right? So
absolutely, yeah, 100%. Let's maybe talk about. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Topics there. Yeah, I mean, I was. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, like, just back to, I know there's like that stigma, and 100%. Like, I mean, a lot of these units you're seeing come onto the market as a result of, let's say, you know, the CMHC MLI Select program. Colin, I know you deal with a lot of those types of projects. A lot of those are, again, smaller square footage.
Yeah,
exactly. Purpose-built rentals. I just want to share a personal story. So I owned and lived in a 586 square foot condo in Vancouver for years. And this 586 square foot condo, it was a 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom in Olympic Village. I love that area. And there was 2 of us and a dog. And it was like, I probably went through about, I want to say probably hundreds of units, like looking at different floor plans and things like that. And what that experience taught me is small spaces can be either really functional or really disastrous. And it's literally just comes down to the floor plan design, like I was saying before. And I will say, like, I personally experienced this, but even living in a small square footage like that, you can find ways to like optimize that if that is your lifestyle. And to be clear, the other person was not a child, so it's not like we had all the like the toys and the kids stuff, right? But my point is that you can live in a very small space that is highly functional and great to live in, as long as it's just designed well.
Totally. And you know what? That's a good segue into my kind of next talking point here that I was looking at is, so in the spec building world, you know, you're trying to maximize your return on that, right? So, you know, you might take what was originally a single family and put 2 skinny infills on there or something like that, right? But so, like you said, the houses are smaller, they're more efficient. But using design to optimize those layouts and build efficiency and make sure you still are creating that buyer demand, I think is a really important thing, and it's strategic too. Very specific to the spec world. Things like compact, efficient footprints on these buildings, whether it's like the purpose-built rentals you just described, or any of the skinnies. Your goal is to kind of reduce the cost there, but in maintaining the functionality of the building, right? Open concept living remains a buyer's top preference. I think probably, in North America for sure. But we want to avoid wasted space in a spec home, things like oversized hallways. In your world, Kathy, the custom homes, like, you maybe you're on an acreage and your land constraints of the footprint of the home are not part of the equation, right? So, you can do an oversized hallway to give you a little more grand feel and stuff. Well, in a spec home, when you're trying to, maximize the square footage for use, that's probably not the best place to use square footage, right? And the other thing we really take a look at in the spec building world, which maybe is less so in the custom, but we really try and stack like mechanical rooms and plumbing rooms and those kind of things. Again, to get cost efficiencies, right? So, ultimately, you try to do those still in the custom world as well, but it's less of an important criteria or a high consideration, right? So
yeah, absolutely. This is actually, I have a list here too, Colin. If you want, I can share. It's a list of, I kind of sat down and I thought to myself, all right, so if we were given this problem, not a problem, but like, okay, this challenge, like, hey, taking a look at like a spec home budget, but then applying the design strategies through the lens of like a luxury custom home, how can you make those two collide?
Right.
So that was a challenge I gave myself. And actually, this list is really, really long. So the way I did this list is it's like design strategies that you can use without actually increasing your construction budget. So I'll share with those. I'll share with everyone what this looks like. So the first one I have here is using strategic sightlines to create the illusion of space where there is not a lot of space. So we do this a lot, even in the world of custom design. So you kind of touched on it a little bit. So, when you walk in a room and it's open concept, obviously that's still going to feel a lot more open than if it had like walls, things like that. There's something that we always use in the world of custom design where I call it, like, how do you experience the project? And what I mean by that is, let's just say somebody is living in that unit. So what is their experience of that building from the time they like literally drive up to this building, park, get out of their car, and then they're walking to the front door or whatever point of access. And then like, what is that whole experience look like? And then what's that experience for them walking through that front door? What happens after that? And what's the experience like literally walking through that entire building? And this is something we always are mindful of in any design that we do. And I think that, again, this isn't something that takes more time. You just need to think about it in the world of design. So for example, I think a lot of these multiplexes that we see, the fourplexes and fiveplexes, like just the consideration of even like site design as an example, like where does everybody park? How do they get out of their car?
Where does the garbage go?
Where does garbage go? And then what does that look like? And even like sight lines, if I'm sitting at my kitchen island having breakfast, like what do you see? Like, are you looking through a big expansive open window, or are you looking at a wall? Like just things like that. It's not more expensive how you design the interior of a home. It's just, you just need to be more thoughtful about that. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I had a topic similar to that, the strategic material finishing choices, and I think in the spec world, this is probably more important again than the custom, but like, standardizing your material dimensions, things like, maybe drywall comes in 4x8, 4x9s, or, ceiling heights, 8-foot door heights, those kind of things, maybe more cabinets, standard lengths, and those windows. We typically don't see any custom windows in a spec build. It's more strategically placed windows than it is a custom size window and those kind of things, right? So, and then even like, using high impact, like cost effective finishes where possible, sometimes you even see some new nice LVP flooring over hardwood and those kind of things, quartz opposed to marble. You see more like MDF trim work opposed to maybe solid wood that you might see in the custom world. And I think that, using builder grade products where possible, whether it's the basement and whatever, and then upgrading the high perceived value areas like kitchens and master bathrooms and those kind of things, right? Those are the boxes that are going to tick off on a seller's dream home list, right? So
For sure. Yeah, I love that. I like everything you just said, Colin, you're totally bang on. I would also say, even I know I've seen some of like the interior design packages that Bliss does, and it's kind of cool where, the one that I just recently saw as an example, the powder room. I remember I was looking at the mood board and I was like, oh man, that's like actually like really cool and like trendy. Like you could even I could envision that like stylistic aesthetic in even like a
yeah,
custom home, right? And again, it doesn't have to be expensive. Like you said, you could still use pretty standard
it
tile and
looks expensive. That's the goal,
yeah,
right?
expensive without actually doing it. So
Yeah.
I definitely think, investing in design is like, oh, that's cool. Because I swear to God, if I see another like just white on white on white, I'm gonna scream.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what you had on your list there, Kathy, but one of the things that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough, specifically in Calgary, is like the energy efficiency of a building, right? And I think that's incorporated in design as well. And it's probably like one of the less sexy aspects of design, right? Because we don't see it and it doesn't impress our friends the same way or whatever. But if you think of the scenario where you're building a purpose-built rental and you're going to hold that building, I mean, operating costs are something that are going to be going up forever, probably. So, considering those in design and potentially like, investing some time and effort into those type of things, whether it's, solar stuff or, upgraded insulation or whatever it could be, better furnaces, those type of things. It's just,
For sure.
your operation costs can be better. So depending again on what your strategy is with the project in the end, those things might be worth considering too. So
Yeah, that's a really good point, Colin. Because I mean, and I don't know if our viewers know this, but with every single project, part of the process is to get an energy advisor involved, and they actually do a calculation in terms of like the energy efficiency of the building. And this is something that's required in order to get your permit, so it's mandatory. So you're doing it anyway. But to again take that extra time and pause just to say, not a lot of time, just enough time to say, okay, like, is this the best path forward, or maybe there's a different mechanical system we can visit or whatever, right? So yeah, you're right. I don't think anyone's ever seen their energy bill go down ever, or their
yeah,
electricity bill go down ever, unless you're on
no,
holidays or something for 2 weeks.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's one of the things that gets overlooked a lot because people want to focus budgets on, the sparkly objects, for lack of a better word, upgrading your kitchen granite or, but again, these have a budget that is tied to builder investors' profitability. So you really have to kind of give and take and focus on the areas that you think are important and that are going to help, the attractiveness of that project. So.
Yeah, love that. I totally agree. The other thing I was thinking, in terms of how design can, help an investor get higher ROI, just even if we roll it back. So when people talk about design, they often think of like the actual floor plan design or finished design. But can we maybe talk about siting
Yeah.
for a moment? Because that's where it all starts. So what I mean by siting is when you have, let's say in Calgary, your standard lot size is 50 feet wide by 120 feet deep. Okay, that's your standard lot size. I think most people know that. But what can you actually put on that site? And it's a trick question because most people will say, "Oh, well, no problem. I can do a 4+4 on it, a four up, four down, fourplex with 4 suites, so you get 8 doors. Awesome." And they kind of have in their mind how they're going to design it because that's what they've seen out there, which is not untrue. However, there have been a lot of municipal regulation changes in the last 12 to 18 months. Like incredible. I've actually in Calgary, I've been myself working in Calgary for 19 years. And this is the like craziest I've ever seen it in terms of regulation changes. So take that same exact 50 by 120-foot lot and call them like this is like what you advise clients on, right?
Yeah.
So okay, I'll talk about the good and the bad first. So on that same 50 by 120, that lot that everybody just talks about, like it's standard, it's not standard is my point. because on the supposed same 50 by 120 lot, Colin I've seen you be like, well, actually you can get 5 units plus 5 suites. So now you get 2 extra doors because you get 10 in total rather than your standard 4 by 4 plus 4. There's roughly less than 3,000 lots in Calgary that are eligible to do that. And actually, as of the new regulations that just currently came out, it's even less than that. So you really have to understand, like knowing and understanding what you can actually do on that lot from a siting standpoint is very important. Now on the flip side, we've also had people come to us with like that same lot, and then it's like, well, now you can't do even the 4 plus 4s for these reasons, and here's why. Or it's going to be like way more expensive.
I mean, but even not just to the multifamily side of things, Kathy, like if you're doing a single family spec, the rezoning changed things there too, because, now you're building a single family in an RCG, not an RC1. Some of the bylaws are different, so some of your setbacks are different. Some of your, those kind of things on the way they calculate heights and all that are different between the two bylaws. So even if you're in the single family world, you've seen a crazy change, in the last year from what the bylaw was then, and like you mentioned though, is it comes down to siting there as well, because, if you're looking at building a contextual single family spec or a contextual semi-detached duplex spec, your contextual criteria is going to be different on every single lot, even if it is a 50 by 120, because it is dependent on your neighbors, their heights and their setbacks and all those type of things, right? So, there isn't really a standard lot is kind of what you were getting at. And, there's different criteria to each one. And really when it comes down to spec, it's like you're working your pro forma to decide, okay, I can fit a 2,500 square foot house on this lot, but then my construction costs are going up too. So like, where is that sweet spot on what you can do versus what you want to do and what you should do, right? So I think you're right, is at the beginning when you have a site is like just analyzing what is going to be the best use for this property from an investment point of view, because it really is all up in the air right now, like you said. And the first question I typically would ask a client is what neighborhood is it in, because that is going to be the first factor right now that is going to be, the most or least successful depending on your neighborhood. So
yeah, you're totally right. And I wish more people knew that, because I think everyone's so focused on like, oh my gosh, my lot's RCG. Awesome. I'm going to put like a multiplex on it. And like, that's actually not true. The zoning actually, I always say like the zoning matters less than like all the other policies. It's kind of almost like the least important thing, but it's the easiest thing that people, the public has access to. Well, that's not true.
We can all use what you're referencing is like LAPs or local area plans. Exactly. And what we're finding right now is that is a hot button topic. So it's something that a lot of developers, investors, builders are not fully familiar with what the impacts are and stuff. So our team spends a lot of time really trying to make sure we're up to date on all that stuff, because the LAPs are turning into be a very valuable, design guidance tool, really is what it is. And telling us what we can do and what we can't do very quickly. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the LAPs, I guess the easiest way to explain it, well, first of all, it stands for local area plan. And there's communities that are, call it more or less like an areas, I guess you could say, grouped together. And then they have a policy that sometimes and often overrides like whatever the zoning is. So even if you're an RCG, it doesn't necessarily mean you can actually put a multiplex on it.
Yeah, because it also conflicts, not just overrides, but it conflicts.
Yes, and then thank you. That's a better word. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And then on top of that, what makes it even more fun is some of them are either approved already. So like those ones are more or less pretty straightforward. And then there's a whole bunch of them that are in the process of being drafted, and then they still need to be voted in by council. So there's like a whole timing thing there. And then there's some that are like still in like preliminary drafts. So it's coming down the pipeline, but again, it's like it's timing thing. So I know for us, like both the Bliss teams and even the phase 1 teams, we track that very closely. So we know like to the date, it's like, okay, here's when the council hearing is for this particular hearing for this LAP. And if you start your project on this day, you may or may not be affected by it, blah, blah, blah. Right. So,
and here's the impact.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's definitely, those are all the things you want to know before you even really buy a property, right? So I think because, the scope of the project is going to be determined by the specific property. So it really is important to do due diligence, I think, prior to starting buying a land. Really, is understanding what you can do there and what that's going to cost and how that works within your performance numbers, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
It really
absolutely.
comes down to those numbers in a spec build.
One number, Colin, maybe we should talk about this briefly as well, is, it kind of ties back into the site design conversation. So I think oftentimes when clients go into the multifamily world, they treat it almost like a bigger semi-detached, and which is like partially true. But then there's also requirements that get triggered the minute you start doing 4+4 and 5+5 style projects. So one of those big requirements is the civil engineering. And, we're not talking a small amount of money. We're talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like it's a 6-figure number by the time it's all said and done. So again, just in the topic of using design as a strategy, working with a team that understands like what that requirement is and how to properly design the site. So I'll give you an example. Most of the projects that we do require a dry well design, and really that's to prevent the need to connect to the city stormwater, which is very, very expensive. So you normally do not want to go down that road. So the other road you can go down is installing a dry well on your site that basically collects all that water runoff. In order to do that, though, you need to make sure.
Kathy, can I just back up 1 second before you go too far? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I just want to back up and kind of explain the why this is. So when you get onto like a 50 by 120 property, previously there's probably a small bungalow single family there, right? This is for people that don't maybe understand the reason for this. And so now when you're covering a bigger percentage of the land, say it rains, that there's not land for the water to absorb into. So, they have to engineer that runoff to, make sure that they can handle those peak flow times on rainfall and whatnot. So, they're not just making you put a drywall in there for no reason. It's really to, ensure that it doesn't overload the capacity of the current city infrastructure, really is what it's doing. And honestly, I think one of the biggest concerns we've seen throughout the neighborhoods and communities with these multi-development permits is that the community associations are somewhat concerned that there's going to be, bigger strain on their utility services and stuff. So, when you get into the multifamily, there's a lot more oversight, like you said, with engineering to ensure that that doesn't happen. So, I guess that's just a little peace of mind. But anyways, I didn't want to interrupt your story, but I just wanted to kind of explain why it's needed.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining. I breathe in, sleep this stuff. Breathe, eat, and sleep this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So sometimes I forget, I get too technical. So that's a really good point for sure. And yeah, just moral of the story is just, making sure you are utilizing design as a strategy. I think I just thought of one final thing. How much time do we have left? A couple of minutes here. We're literally working with one of our clients right now. He's actually a repeat client of ours, which is pretty cool. He's actually doing, I won't disclose too many details of the project, but he's doing a sixplex essentially at a really cool site in Calgary. And this one's like a little bit more custom, but it was kind of cool because when he first came to us, he knows the deal, right? Like he knows we always want to be like super high quality, making sure things are done right, all that. So instead of barreling headfirst into the project, he's actually spent, I think at this point now we've been working with him for a few months just to do different site layouts, just to explore different options in terms of like how the site can be set up. And him and his partner are being very intentional about this. So I will say that, that for me is time really well spent, but also recognizing, yes, time is also money. So, obviously there's a balance there. And in their case, time is slightly less important. They just want to get everything done like perfectly right. But that's something else that we can do, or like Bliss can do in the pre-design stage, which is the siting, like different siting.
I have a couple more things. We got a minute left here. The one other thing that I had on my notes here that I think is a one that's really trending upwards in the spec world, smart home features like thermostats, security, lighting, those kind of things. They add a huge perceived value and a fairly minimal investment. So, I think those kind of things are really adding to that sellability. People are wanting technology and these type of things. So one comment, and then I had kind of the 3 most common pitfalls that spec builders fall in that you want to avoid. So first one is overcomplicating the design, right? Every extra roof line, niche, bump out, foundation jog increases your cost and adds very little value probably in your spec world. Last minute design changes, redesigns, they lead to delays. They're going to waste material on site. You're going to have higher labor costs, all those kind of things. So I think that's an important one, is like once you decide on your design, move on and build that building basically on a spec. And then also I think following the trends too closely. Timeless always sells faster. And I think really as a spec builder, you want to avoid any costly, future remodels for the homeowner, any of those kind of things. So timeless is always kind of the key, I think. So
totally. That's awesome. Hey, cool. I think like those things, it's so interesting, Colin. A lot of those principles also apply to custom design, right? Like, agreed. You know me, I always like talk about timeless design and like a lot of those things that you talked about. So
yeah, I mean, I guess the difference is that the custom homeowner doesn't have the clock ticking potentially on a investment, right? Sure. So I mean, they may still, depending on the financing, but yeah, no. So anyway, I think we're out of time, so we'll see you next week.
Yeah, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for joining. Bye for now.